Looks like we're about good here. Let's open with prayer, and we'll go ahead and get started. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for the day and for the opportunity, God, that you give us to gather together. I ask, Father, that you'd help this time to be beneficial, profitable for us. Father, help us to have reinforced in our hearts and minds that idea that you've given in your word, that you're always present, always ready to help. And God, I pray that you'd help us to realize that you've given us all the tools and resources that we need to accomplish what you've asked us to do. Father, I pray you would be with the different aspects of the ministry, be with those that are here today, those that are unable to be here for one reason or another. God, we ask that you would just meet the needs of all that are part of our church. We ask in your name, amen. All right. Let's move from the puzzle here. This is lesson 8 of 10. This series is moving, seems to be quickly to me, maybe not to you, but it seems to be moving quickly. Just a couple of weeks left. At this point, looking ahead just a couple of weeks, the plan is to go into a study of the book of Colossians for, I'm anticipating 12 or 13 weeks thereabouts. May take a little bit longer, we'll see. But that's what I'm looking at, unless something changes quickly within the next couple of weeks. But looking at a study of the book of Colossians. So we've been looking at the Mediterranean Sea rules. That is, life principles that we can pull from Paul's experiences on the Mediterranean, particularly this experience that we see here in Acts 27. It's kind of a unique experience in that he was not free to go where and when he wanted. He had maybe not a ball and chain, but he had a figurative ball and chain. He was a Roman prisoner. He wasn't going too far, too fast without permission. And yet he was right exactly where he was supposed to be. Sometimes we get focused upon the conditions that we're dealing with and don't realize the fact that God is still in control and doing what he wants to do. And that's what Paul was dealing with. He was right where he was supposed to be under the conditions that he was supposed to be under. This week, the lesson is don't underestimate the 1%. And we'll see that in just a moment. If you have your Bibles, they're in Acts 27. We'll read a few verses here. If you're not there, if you want to turn quickly, Acts 27. And we are at the end of the chapter, keeping in mind this is lesson 8 of 10, which means we're going to roll into the next chapter for the last couple of lessons. Acts 27, beginning in verse 37. And we've talked about this a few times. We were all in the ship, 216 souls. So there were 276 people total on this ship. This was not a big monster ocean liner like we see today, but this was not a small rowboat either. This was a pretty good-sized sailing vessel for that age in this place. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. So basically, they had their last meal. They filled their stomachs. We've got one last thing we can get rid of to lighten the ship. Because when the wheat goes, the food's gone. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. So the day comes, they can see, and they don't know where they are, but they see a stream, a river, they see an inlet. And their plan is, if it's at all possible, we want the boat to go there. Okay? And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, hoised up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground. And the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken. When you get to that first part there, the forepart stuck fast, you kind of get a foreshadowing that the next statement's not going to be good. Because if the front part's not moving, it's either a period, the whole boat's staying there, or it continues. And if it continues, that means the back part is moving. And you may or may not spend much time on the water, but if the two parts of the boat are going in different directions, that's not a good thing. The hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. We've alluded numerous times to Acts 16. Philippian jailer, earthquake, doors are open. Jailer sees the doors are open. He's ready to kill himself because if he doesn't, the Romans will. Escaped prisoners, okay, if they're gone, you're dead. And that's what's happening here. These Roman soldiers understand if any one of these prisoners escapes, they're dead. So in order to save themselves alive, they're going to kill the prisoners. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped, notice this next word, they escaped all safe to land. So this passage that we read today starts with, hey, there's 276 people on board. It ends with, they all make it to land, which means there's 276 people on the shore. And so that kind of gives us the last part of the voyage itself, at least for this ship. They've been in this storm now for quite some time. Violent storm. The ship now has broken apart. It is not going any further. We've got our review, and the first page here is all the different titles of the 7 lessons we've had prior. I'll just look at the last 3 here as we go over these each week. The last 3, first of all, jettison hindering cargo. They've kept one thing on board. They needed wheat. They needed to eat. Now even the wheat is gone. But anything that would get in the way of them having 100% maneuverability, of them being able to float as high in the water as possible to avoid any obstacles under the water, they did what they could to save the ship. Oops, let me go back here. Expect God to do exactly as he said. God will accomplish what he said he will do. In our age, we have a tremendous tool that Paul did not have, and that is that we have the completed scriptures. We need to take advantage of those. Because sometimes the answers we're looking for are right here. Expect God to do exactly what he said he will do. And then last 2 weeks ago, we had Minister in the Moment. That where we are, we always have an opportunity to minister. Even in the midst of storms. And even as I was thinking just when I was getting everything set up here this morning, what has been using the analogy that we have in this series, the stormiest day of your life? And some of you have had some pretty rough days. It could be the day the doctor comes into the room and says, we've got bad news. I mean, and it's a different storm for each and every one of us. The things that we deal with. And yet, in that time, we have to take advantage of the opportunity that we have to minister. It's not always, it may very well be, but not always an opportunity to share the gospel. Maybe it is. But maybe you're working with other Christian brothers and sisters. And now you're showing how to act and react in the midst of the storm. You know, we have to be aware of the situation and act accordingly. As we continue with the introduction, we're familiar with the verse, where 2 or 3 are gathered. Keep in mind, look at the title to this particular lesson here, don't underestimate the 1%. A large crowd is not needed to accomplish great things. And there's lots of examples in the scriptures. And we'll see a couple of those as we go through here. David and Goliath. The entire army of Israel was hiding in their tents. David goes out and fights the giant that nobody wanted to fight. David, one person. And there are other examples where it was not a great crowd, it was a small group, or maybe even just a couple of individuals. Because God can use few or many. He can use however many he so chooses. And understand, the rest of that, there am I in their midst. We have a God who's present within us in the form of the Holy Spirit. If he's omnipresent and he's present within us, that means wherever I am, he's with me. And he's told us in the Word, Paul wrote about this, that we have access to all spiritual resources, all spiritual blessings. We have the toolbox with the tools needed to navigate the storms of this life. Now, think about the different tools that are out there and available. And tools that you may know how to use, and I would have no clue how to use. I probably may not have that particular tool in my box, but I've got another one that will help me get the job done. I have the tools needed to do the work that I'm called to do. And so we have access to these resources. Now, I didn't mention, maybe I did, I don't think I did. The handouts are on the back. I came in early, so I stuck them on the back. If you need a handout, they're back there. If you don't want one, that's perfectly fine too. Unsinkable saints. Think about this. 276 people on this ship. I'm going to guess there had been other ships on the Mediterranean that had sunk and all perished. Why on this one were all saved alive? Unsinkable saints. First here, I've got a verse from Ezekiel. Therefore have I poured out my indignation upon them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath. Their own way have I recompensed upon their heads, saith. God sees and judges as he sees fit. And he may very well look and say, these people deserve punishment. And you would think, we've got Roman soldiers, we've got the sailors themselves, they're all, why are they not sinking with the boat? Well, stop and think about the people on boat. We know of 3 believers on board this ship. We've got Paul. We've got the writer of the account, Luke. And there's Aristarchus. There are 3. Which is roughly 1%. Roughly. It's not an exact number, but you get the idea. Now think of other examples when we've seen this. We've got Abraham. God comes to him. I've got the reference there, Genesis 18 and 19. God comes to him, and they sit around the fire and talk. And God shares some things with Abraham, amongst others. He is going to destroy Sodom. And Abraham besought God to save Sodom on Lot's behalf. Abraham, in spite of all that his nephew had done, still loved Lot. And Abraham talked with God and said, would you please not destroy the city? And he started with a higher number, but basically it got down to the point where God said he would save the entire city if there were but 10 righteous people. So he started with a higher number, 50-ish, ends up at 10. Abraham is doing what he can to save Lot and his family, and in so doing, save the inhabitants of the city. And God, who is omniscient, couldn't even find 10. And we find the passage, like I say, in Genesis 18 and 19. If there had been but 10, there would have been a different outcome. But there weren't. We think of Gideon. Gideon had a small force to fight the Midianites. When word went out that he was going to fight the enemy, there was a great number of folks that came in. And God pared them down to 300. And then God gave them some unusual tools to use for the battle. But God gave them a very small force. I mean, when you think about it, 300 against the army, not a chance. But God gave victory. It wasn't the 300, it was the God. And we find that passage in Judges 7. In Judges 7. God can use, and we've seen this already, few, God can use many. It's up to him. Many or few, he is the one that gives the victory. Now back to the passage here in Acts 27, all on board were saved alive because of the few believers. It wasn't a few good people. It wasn't a few well-behaved people. It wasn't a few people who knew how to sail the ship. It was a few people who had their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. And the entirety of the people on board were saved alive. And this holds true on boats. This holds true in nations. My guess is, and it's really not much of a guess, is that God sitting on his throne in heaven isn't real pleased with what he sees happening day by day in the United States of America. And it's been said many, many times by preachers, if God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, how does he tolerate this? The believers are what makes the difference. We have a job to do, and God looks at these saints. They're unsinkable saints. That boat could have done whatever it wanted to do. God had already said, Paul, you will go to Rome. And so guess where Paul was going to end up? He was going to end up in Rome. Next, was you not afraid? I know the grammar, but it's in quotes, so it's not mine. Was you not afraid? John Wesley, great evangelist of years gone by, one of the founders of the Methodist Church. John Wesley went to the colonies. He's from England, went to the colonies as a missionary. It was kind of interesting. He was not yet biblically converted. On his voyage over, he was traveling with the Moravians, German believers. And there was a great storm on the ocean that threatened to sink the ship. And he was completely astounded at their demeanor. Because in the midst of this great storm, the Moravian believers were unafraid of death. Again, we've heard it said. We'll take Paul's quote. How's that? Absent with the body is present. Absent from the body, present with the Lord. The Moravian believers fully understood that. If we die, our next stop is heaven. And so they weren't afraid. They knew that God is in control. And Wesley was impacted by that. That did lead to his conversion. That led him to come to Christ. As he talked to them and asked them, was you not afraid? And they're like, no, not at all. And the quote goes on and says, not even your women and children? No, because we know that God is in control. Well, that was unlike his understanding of who God was and how God operated. That changed his life. And so we see the lesson here that our temperament in the midst of the storm impacts others. How we act and react makes a difference. I've mentioned I grew up not far from the shore, like a couple 5 miles, 7 miles, something like that, from the shores of Lake Michigan. But there were lots of other lakes and rivers around where I grew up in Upper Michigan. And so I grew up, skipping stones was a way of life. You weren't going to fill the lake. That wasn't going to happen. So you skip. You know, if you skip stones, every time that stone hits the water, what does it make? It makes a small ripple. Well, if you throw the bigger the stone, the bigger the ripple, obviously. But when you throw that stone, it makes a difference. And any bug or leaf or twig or anything else right there rides that wave as the wave goes out. When we act and react in the midst of the storm, others are impacted by the waves that we make. Others are impacted by our actions and attitudes. They see what we do. And so, as Wesley says, was you not afraid? No. Because we need to keep in mind, we never know who is watching. The Moravians, they were living their life with God in mind. Did they have any idea the impact that John Wesley would have on the world at that time? No. They were living with God in mind, and Wesley would really shake the world, the English world at that time, because of how he saw them act and react. So the question is, what do those watching see in us? What do they see in us, in me, in you? And so we had the unsinkable saints, was you not afraid? The next point here, for the good of others. Now, couple big quotes. And I think, did I leave those in your notes? I was going to take them out, but I think I left them in because I had plenty of space on this one. First from A.W. Tozer. A real Christian, and that should be is, I think I've got in, is an odd number anyway. He feels supreme love for one whom he has never seen, talks familiarly every day to someone he cannot see, expects to go to heaven on the virtue of another, empties himself in order to be full, admits he is wrong so he can be declared right, goes down in order to get up, is strongest when he is weakest, richest when he is poorest, and happiest when he feels worst. He dies so he can live, forsakes in order to have, gives away so he can keep, sees the invisible, hears the inaudible, and knows that which passes knowledge. That is a profound statement. And yet when we stop and think about it, that's where we're supposed to be every day. Doing what doesn't make sense because we know the final outcome. So we've got a quote from Tozer, and then I've got a quote from Spurgeon. Paul was put into a ship among thieves and other criminals, into a ship among sailors and soldiers who were none of the best in those days. These were not the genteel folk, okay? You could say they were mean and ugly. But he was put there for their good. This, then, I would lay down as a general theory. There are multitudes of Christians who are in places very uncomfortable and perhaps very unsuitable for them, who are put there for the good of others. Okay, from Tozer. Here's who the Christian is and what he deals with. From Spurgeon. Now that we have that underway, this is why we're there. We are there to impact those around us. Those Moravians were sailing across the ocean and found themselves in the midst of a terrible storm that threatened to sink the ship, and they acted and reacted properly. Wesley saw that. It radically changed his life to the point that he came to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. He went from being a religious person to being a regenerated person. And it changed the course of English history. And Tozer and Spurgeon said, you know what? God may put us in a similar position to accomplish a similar thing, to change the lives of those around us. Go to 1 Peter 2. 1 Peter 2. We'll have a few verses here as we go into the conclusion here to look at. 1 Peter 2 and verse 12. Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may be by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. You live properly among the Gentiles so that they see you act and react, and they then may glorify God. We impact others. And then keeping in mind where we are here in the story, the ship, they're going to park it in this inlet. Well, they tried to get the ship into the inlet. Didn't work out too well. You don't have to put the oops in there. That was me. They tried. To no avail. hit a sandbar, front stopped, back didn't. End of ship. Not the end of the people, though. Though the ship was destroyed, all were saved alive. Because God didn't really care about the ship. God did care about the people. Now, that could lead to an entire lesson on the value or lack thereof of material goods. God doesn't care about my stuff. God cares about me. And God doesn't care about your stuff. God cares about you. And we spend so much, this is general we spend so much time trying to accumulate stuff. There was you don't see them very often, there was a Rubbermaid storage container commercial. Oh heavens, it's probably been 20 years ago now. You're all familiar with Rubbermaid storage containers, okay? Everybody's got one, or more. And this family was all cluttered in the commercial. And so they got Rubbermaid storage containers and put all their clutter in containers, and then looked around and said, hey, that means we can get more stuff. Welcome to America, 2024, and generations earlier, and if Christ tarries, unfortunately, generations to come. Right? It's all about the accumulation of stuff. I don't know why. I've mentioned before, on the way to work each night, I call mom and dad and talk to them for a few minutes. Dad has been in he had some physical issues here within the last month, and so he can't drive right now. So he's been in and even before that, he's been in a clean all of his stuff mode. Just in case you're curious, my dad's got lots of stuff. Mom watches this every week. Mom, you would agree. So he's got lots of stuff. So he's been getting rid of stuff. Many trips to the green box. They've got stuff that they're getting rid of that they accumulated back when I was in high school, when they were having big yard sales to raise money to take the church kids to camp. Dad was a game warden. He was in charge of setting the schedule, so he usually set the schedule so that he had that camp week off, and he took the kids to camp every year. Probably 25 years he did that. And he raised money to take kids who didn't have the money to go to camp. They had a big sale to raise money. Well, they had people in the church and the community would give them stuff. And what didn't sell, what do? Save it for next year. Well, they're getting rid of stuff. Okay, that's the background to the store. So I mentioned yard sales. He mentioned yard sales, and I said something about, the yard sale tough because with the hours I'm working, I can't go through all this stuff. And he says, how much stuff do you still have from Texas? I said, let's go on to the next topic of conversation here. We accumulate stuff. I've got stuff in boxes that I haven't used since we moved up here. And that was when? 2009? That was 2000. I haven't used it, and I have no plan to use it. Slowly, I'm working through it. I went through a couple boxes this last year. It's a very slow process. And then there's the stuff that you look at and you say, well, it's got sentimental value. Maybe to you, but not to your kids. Most of the kids are growing up in an age where they don't want clutter of any kind, unless they bought it themselves, of course. But they don't want clutter. And so we've got all this stuff. And we see this here. God wasn't concerned about the stuff. Whatever cargo they had went overboard. Any extra parts of the ship that weren't needed. They didn't get rid of the mainsail. We see that because they raised it here. But anything else they could get rid of, it told us already in the story, they got rid of that. Now they eat the wheat, and whatever wheat's left goes overboard. Because they want to save the ship so that in saving the ship, they can save themselves. And now they're going to sail the ship into this inlet, and God doesn't even care about that. He takes the ship and sticks it in the sandbar and breaks it apart. But in doing that, did you notice as we read how some of the people swam ashore, others did what? I'm on a different page now. They boards or parts of the ship and floated to the shore. Even though the ship didn't make it to shore, The ship was used to help them get to shore. Well, at least parts of the ship were used to help them get to shore. God doesn't care about the material goods. He's concerned about the souls of the people that are there. And in spite of all that he was encountering, Paul reflected Jesus Christ to the people who were on board, the people who were in need. He showed them what they needed. We saw last week, or 2 weeks ago. Before they had this last meal, what did he do? He blessed the food. 3 believers. But 273 others had to listen to him pray. He reflected Christ to the people who were in need. Well, let's look at the conclusion here. First of all, we are never alone. And we'll see that again here in just a couple minutes. We are never alone. Elijah learned that. Elijah has the great victory on the top of Mount Carmel. Declares that there's going to be rain finally. As he has his servant go look for a cloud. He says, I see a cloud, but it's about the size of a man's hand. He says, it's time to go. And Elijah runs. And he runs into the wilderness. And he finally gets to a place. He says, I only am still serving you. And God says, no, not right. There are plenty of others. You just don't see them. There are others. We're never alone. But we've already mentioned, there's also the Spirit of God that's always present with us. We're never alone. We're never alone in that there's always others, but even if there's nobody within my little circle here, the Spirit of God is still here. He dwells within. I'm never alone on 2 fronts. I need to keep that in mind. We see here, as we go through this story here, the fact that, hey, we need to keep our head up and our eyes open. We need to be alert and attentive to what's going on. Be aware. Even in the midst of a storm. Don't close your eyes because there's something. No, you need to be aware of what's happening. We need to see God work. We need to have a heart for the people around us. It's interesting, as we see all this, Paul communicates with the centurion and the ship owner. Says, hey, we should stay here. We should winter here. They don't winter. He didn't lose his opportunity to minister. We talked about that. Later they come into the big storm. Paul says, we should have stayed there, but seeing this is where we are, here's what's going to happen here. And when God spoke to him in the night, when God sent the angel, Paul relayed that information. He had a heart for those people. Here, the centurion stops his soldiers from killing all the prisoners. The centurion could have said, this one stays alive, but kill the others. But Paul said, hey, it's either everybody or nobody. He had a heart for the people around him. And we need to have that same heart. Well, let's look at a couple of verses quickly. Let's go to Psalm 56. Psalm 56. We'll be back here in the New Testament in just a minute. Psalm 56. I've got down verse 3. Let's start at verse 1. Psalm 56, verse 1. I mentioned Bibles have headings at the top. Mine has headings between each particular section here. And at the beginning of this psalm, it says times of distress. Now think of where Paul is in that passage. He was in a time of distress. 56:1. Be merciful unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresseth me. Mine enemies would daily swallow me up. For they be many that fight against me, O thou most high. Verse 3, the verse that we're looking for here. What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. When I find myself afraid, I should know where to go. I should know when everybody else is failing me, I should know who I can trust. And you can continue on through the psalm there, but that is the idea here, that in time of distress, I know where to go. I have a God that I can trust. All right, back to the New Testament, 2 Corinthians 3. 2 Corinthians 3. back when I was in, probably junior high. Christian school I attended started when I was in 6th grade, so probably 7th or 8th grade. The pastor that we had chapel every day, and he'd come in and he would often ask somebody for quote a verse. And there was one kid, this is always, always, always the verse he quoted. But it's kind of an interesting verse. 2 Corinthians 3 and verse 2. Ye are our epistle, written in our hearts, known and read of all men. Paul's writing to these people at Corinth. He says, hey, I'm not seeing everybody else, but I'm communicating my message to you, and everybody else sees you. They're reading you. And we're familiar with the phrase, they read him like a book. Guess where it originated? Right there. Ye are our epistle, known and read of all men. Paul says, we have communicated to you, and you're our epistle written in our hearts. And everybody in that community sees you. They read you. And then Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13:5. And it says, let your conversation be without covetousness, or live in such a way that you're not wanting stuff. We've already seen that. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. So, what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. Ye are our epistle, written in our heart, known and read of all men. I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. We, no matter where we are, what we're doing, he is in control. He's in charge. He's always present. Our godly living impacts those around us. It's like skipping that stone makes those waves. Well, I may get this one wrong, but what is it? The rising tide floats all boats. I think that's how it goes. As the tide comes in and the tide goes up, all the ships on that particular body of water go up. And as the tide goes out, all those ships go down. The rising tide affects everybody. We cannot choose those who are around us, but we can choose how we act and react before them. We're not always in control of our company. We're not always in control of the people that are around us. But I can determine how I will act and react and what they see in me. And that's a challenge sometimes. That's a challenge. And sometimes, let's see if it goes here. Sometimes we go through tough times and tough places for the benefit of others. The places we go and the people we see, the situations we deal with, sometimes I go through them to help somebody else. Maybe I go through them so that I can develop a relationship with somebody. Maybe I go through them so that they can see how I act and react. Maybe I go through them so that they can see how to navigate the difficulties of life. I don't know why I would go through there and how it would benefit them, but I need to understand all things work together for good. And I've mentioned this before. Who defines what is good? God does. And what is good? Good is that he is glorified in me and through me. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. So regardless of the storm that I'm dealing with, God says it has a outcome that I want to see, a good outcome. It doesn't mean that I will go through life with no trouble. We love the rose. But the stem of the rose contains what? Thorns. I don't know. How many of you have ever been admiring the rose and encountered the thorn? I had a friend in Texas. He was a unique individual. He really was. But he used to say everything in Texas has horns, thorns, or fangs. And he was probably right. How many times have we encountered the horns, thorns, or fangs in life? We see that rose and we go to admire it, and oh man, I didn't see that thorn there. I thought I was going to get the thorn between the fingers, and I got it in the finger. We go through life, life can be a struggle sometimes. Been there, right? Maybe, Ames. I drove by the Ames location there on Railroad in Sharmanstown. It has a big old sign in front now. It says, for lease. If you look at the sign, not the for lease sign, but the Ames sign, established 1774. Been around for a while. Not now. And I made the mention to Becca. I'm like, I understand why, but I'm really not a huge fan of mergers and acquisitions. Because mergers and acquisitions generally mean we're closing a location or people are losing their jobs or both. So how do we deal with the storms of life? You're at work, and then there's a message that comes across in one way or another. It could be email, could be an intercom, could be a face-to-face meeting. Hey, in one way or another, your job is done in X number of days. Is that a storm to deal with? I mentioned already, what do you do when the doctor walks in? Is that a storm to deal with? And think of so many other storms that you have dealt with, or you have friends, neighbors, or family that have dealt with. The storms of life are there. How do we navigate those? Now, don't underestimate the 1%. You might be the one navigating that storm that has a life-changing impact on somebody else. Sometimes it benefits me, sometimes I benefit others by the way that I navigate this storm. You might be part of that small minority, that 1% that makes a difference. Don't lose your chance. Trust God. What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. I know who holds the future, and I know who holds my hand. God knows what I'm going through. He knows what I went through, going through, will go through, and he's always present there ready to help. He's an ever-present help in time of need. We can trust him. Father, thank you for the day, for your goodness to us. Father, help us to learn the valuable lessons that you have set for us in your word. Help us to read it, to study it, to meditate on it, God, to reflect upon it, and to put to practice the principles that we learn. Accomplish your purpose, we ask. Father, I pray you be with the service to come. Speak to our hearts. Help us to have a desire to learn more of you. We ask in your name, amen. Have a great day.